The marriage of silence. The night Khalid Hassan died, Amina Rahman did not cry. She stood in the kitchen long after the sirens faded, her fingers trembling against the cold marble counter, listening to the echo of her own breathing. The house felt unfamiliar without his voice filling it, without the sharp commands, the suspicious questions, the heavy footsteps that once made her children flinch. Upstairs, Hiba and Yusuf slept at a neighbor's house, unaware that the world they knew had already changed forever. By morning, the neighbors would whisper. By evening, they would judge. But at that moment, Amina's thoughts drifted backward to the beginning, when love had not yet learned to wear a mask. Khalid had once been charming. He met her at a family gathering, his smile easy, his words confident. He admired her intelligence, praised her modesty, promised stability and protection. Amina, raised to value patience and compromise, mistook intensity for devotion. When he asked for her hand, he spoke of building a life anchored in faith and respect. She believed him. The first months of marriage were quiet and careful. Khalid insisted she leave her job, saying a wife should not exhaust herself outside when her home required her attention. It sounded reasonable, protective even. Amina agreed. Isolation did not arrive all at once. It crept in gradually. He criticized her friends, too modern, too opinionated. He questioned her phone calls, too frequent, too secretive. He frowned when she visited her parents, too attached, too dependent. Each complaint seemed small on its own. Together, they built invisible walls around her. When Hiba was born, Amina felt a fierce joy that surprised her. Khalid held the baby proudly. Yet even then he reminded Amina that motherhood was her primary duty. Children need discipline, he would say, though Hiba was barely old enough to walk. Yusuf arrived 3 years later, soft-eyed and gentle. By then, Khalid's affection had thinned into control. He monitored expenses, demanding explanations for every purchase. He scanned her messages when he thought she wasn't looking. He disliked laughter that did not include him. "You think I don't see how you look at other people?" he once accused, his voice low and dangerous. Amina had stared at him, stunned. "I don't look at anyone. That's what they all say." The arguments never left bruises that others could see, but they left marks just the same. Words became weapons, subtle, sharp, relentless. He called her ungrateful, dramatic, disloyal. When she cried, he accused her of manipulation. The children learned silence early. Hiba watched her father carefully, studying his moods the way other children studied cartoons. Yusuf clung to Amina's dress whenever Khalid's tone hardened. Amina became a shield made of patience, absorbing every harsh remark so it would not reach her children. And then, after 11 years of marriage, the distance between them became official. The divorce was swift but bitter. Khalid refused to accept that she had chosen freedom. He insisted she had been influenced, poisoned by outside voices. "There's someone else," he told her during their final meeting at the lawyer's office. "There has to be." There wasn't. Not then. Omar Siddiqui returned to her life months later, not as a secret lover, but as a memory from a gentler time. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, shared textbooks in school, exchanged polite greetings at weddings over the years. When he saw her at a grocery store, balancing 2 bags and scolding Yusuf gently, he offered to help. It should have been insignificant. Instead, it felt like oxygen. Omar listened when she spoke. He asked about the children. He never interrupted. His kindness was not dramatic. It was steady. He did not treat her like something fragile or something guilty. For the first time in years, Amina felt seen rather than inspected. Their conversations remained cautious and proper, yet Khalid somehow learned of them. The accusations returned with greater venom. "You replaced me already?" he spat during a tense phone call. "Was that your plan all along?" "We're divorced," she replied, forcing calm into her voice. "You don't control who I speak to. I control what happens to my children." The threat lingered long after he hung up. Custody battles began. Khalid claimed she was unstable, immoral, influenced by another man. He painted himself as a wronged husband protecting his offspring from a reckless mother. Amina found herself defending not only her actions, but her character. One evening, Khalid appeared unannounced outside her house, his car headlights cutting through the darkness. The children froze at the sight of him. Amina stepped outside before he could knock. "You think you can erase me?" he demanded. "No," she said quietly. "I just want peace." He leaned closer, his expression tight with something darker than anger. "If I ever find proof that you betrayed me, I will make sure you lose everything." She held his gaze, though her pulse pounded. "There is no proof." He smiled without warmth. "Then pray, I never decide there is." That night, as she tucked Hiba and Yusuf into bed, Amina sensed the fragile balance of her life shifting. The divorce had ended the marriage, but it had not ended Khalid's need to possess her. Standing alone in her kitchen hours after his death, the memory of that smile returned with chilling clarity. They would call it murder. They would dissect her motives. They would measure her grief. But none of them had lived inside the marriage of silence. And none of them knew what Khalid had threatened to take from her. As dawn crept through the curtains, Amina closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for forgiveness, not yet, but for strength. Because whatever the world believed, this story had only just begun. The weight of suspicion. In the weeks before Khalid's death, suspicion became a living thing. It lingered in the corners of Amina Rahman's home, settled into the pauses between phone calls, and followed her like a shadow she could not outrun. Divorce had legally separated her from Khalid Hassan, but it had not severed his belief that she still belonged to him. Every conversation felt monitored. Every outing potentially reported back to him through unseen channels. Omar Siddiqui noticed the change before she admitted it. "You're not sleeping," he observed gently one afternoon as they sat at a small cafe near the children's school. His voice carried no accusation, only concern. Amina offered a restrained smile. "Mothers don't sleep much. That's not what this is." His perception unsettled her because it was accurate. Omar had always been attentive, even as a boy sharing classroom benches and borrowed pens. Now, his attentiveness felt both comforting and dangerous. Comforting because it reminded her she was not invisible. Dangerous because Khalid had already constructed a narrative in which Omar was the villain. Their meetings remained infrequent and cautious. They spoke mostly of the children, Hiba's growing love for literature, Yusuf's fascination with building toy cities on the living room floor. Occasionally, conversation drifted toward Amina's uncertainty about the future. Omar listened without interruption, never pressing for intimacy, never exploiting vulnerability. Yet emotional closeness does not require physical proximity. It grows quietly, fed by understanding. One evening, as Amina prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from Omar. Did Hiba's presentation go well? The simplicity of the question tightened her throat. Khalid had rarely asked about school events unless discipline was required. Someone remembering such details felt foreign. She replied briefly, aware that even harmless exchanges could be misinterpreted. Khalid's reaction arrived sooner than expected. He requested an additional custody review, claiming he had reason to believe the children were being exposed to immoral influences. The accusation, though vague, carried weight. In meetings with his lawyer, he implied that Amina's character had shifted since the divorce. He suggested emotional instability. He hinted at impropriety without presenting evidence. The strategy was calculated. If he could not control her directly, he would control the narrative. When Amina learned of the filing, her composure fractured. Losing the children was not an abstract fear. It was the single possibility that hollowed her chest. "He's trying to scare you," Omar said when she told him. "It's working," she replied. For the first time, frustration edged into his voice. "You haven't done anything wrong. That won't matter if he convinces the court otherwise." The truth hovered unspoken between them. Khalid did not need proof. He needed doubt. Days later, that doubt materialized. Amina returned home from picking up groceries to find Khalid's car parked across the street. He stood beside it, arms crossed, watching her with clinical intensity. Hiba instinctively moved closer to her mother. Yusuf lowered his gaze. "We need to talk," Khalid said. "There's nothing left to discuss," Amina answered evenly. "There's everything to discuss," he countered. You think I don't know about your meetings? They're not your concern. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You've replaced me with him. There is no replacement. Don't insult me. The children stood frozen on the sidewalk, absorbing each word like silent witnesses. Amina realized then that Khalid's objective was not clarity but intimidation. He wanted the children to associate her with scandal, to erode their certainty in her. You're frightening them, she said quietly. They deserve to know what kind of mother they have. The statement struck harder than any shouted insult. Khalid was no longer defending pride. He was weaponizing parenthood. That night, Amina double-checked the locks and kept her phone within reach. Sleep evaded her. She replayed every interaction with Omar, searching for moments that could be twisted into betrayal. Emotional reliance felt suddenly perilous. The following afternoon, Khalid requested to see the children alone. Court agreements required cooperation, so she complied. When they returned, Hiba's eyes were red. What did he say? Amina asked softly. Hiba hesitated. He said you might leave us one day. Like you left him. The cruelty of it stole Amina's breath. Khalid had begun planting seeds of distrust in the only hearts she could not afford to lose. That evening, she called Omar, not for romance, not for reassurance, but for clarity. I need to stop seeing you, she said before he could speak. A long pause followed. Is that what you want? It's what protects them. And what protects you? She did not answer. Protection for herself had long ago become secondary. I won't disappear, Omar said finally. But I won't make your life harder either. His restraint deepened her internal conflict. If he had demanded or pressured, detachment would have been easier. Instead, he offered patience. 2 days later, Khalid sent a message that chilled her more than any confrontation. I have what I need now. No explanation. No detail. Just certainty. Amina stared at the screen, heart pounding. Had he fabricated evidence? Manipulated photographs? Intercepted messages? With Khalid, imagination was often more threatening than reality. That evening, as rain began to fall, she sensed something approaching. Not resolution, but escalation. Suspicion had matured into strategy. Khalid was no longer merely accusing. He was preparing. Upstairs, Hiba read quietly while Yusuf constructed another fragile city from plastic bricks. Amina watched them and understood that whatever storm was forming would not spare innocence. Her phone remained silent after Khalid's message, but silence no longer meant safety. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the weight of suspicion pressed heavier than ever. And somewhere beyond her reach, Khalid believed he had already won. The night of the storm. The storm arrived just after sunset, folding the sky in a heavy gray and rattling the windows of Amina Rahman's house. Rain struck the glass in restless bursts, as if the weather itself sensed that something fragile was about to break. Inside, Hiba finished her homework at the dining table while Yusuf lay on the carpet, lining up toy cars in perfect rows. The ordinary calm felt deliberate, almost rehearsed. Amina moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, though her thoughts refused to settle. Khalid's final message, I have what I need now, had remained unanswered. The silence that followed was worse than accusation. It suggested preparation. At 8:17 p.m., headlights cut through the rain and stopped directly outside her gate. Her pulse tightened before she even looked. Khalid stepped out of his car without an umbrella, his expression unreadable beneath the streetlight. Water darkened his hair and jacket, but he made no attempt to shield himself from the downpour. He walked to the door and knocked once, slow, deliberate. Hiba's pencil froze mid-sentence. Yusuf looked up. Stay upstairs, Amina instructed calmly, though her voice carried a strain she could not disguise. Lock the bedroom door. Don't come down unless I call you. They obeyed without protest. Children accustomed to tension rarely question it. When Amina opened the door, Khalid did not greet her. He stepped inside as though the house still belonged to him. Rainwater trailed across the floor. You shouldn't be here, she said, closing the door behind him. I can go wherever my children live, he replied evenly. His tone lacked its usual volatility, which unsettled her more than anger would have. They're asleep. They shouldn't be taught to lie. The accusation hung between them. Khalid removed his phone from his pocket and held it up. I warned you. She refused to look at the screen. Warn me about what? About humiliating me. You humiliate yourself, she answered before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened, but he did not raise his voice. Instead, he moved into the living room and sat down, as if conducting a meeting. I have screenshots, he said. Messages. Calls. Enough to prove emotional misconduct. There is no misconduct. You confided in another man. You met him. You let him into my children's lives. They are not your property. They are my responsibility. The distinction revealed everything. Khalid did not see fatherhood as love, but as authority. You're building a case based on jealousy, she said. There is nothing inappropriate. Inappropriate. He laughed softly. You think betrayal begins in a bedroom? It begins in secrets. The word struck her because it carried partial truth. She had hidden the depth of her reliance on Omar, not because it was immoral, but because it would be misunderstood. Khalid interpreted emotional survival as infidelity. You're obsessed, she said quietly. I am prepared, he corrected. He stood and walked toward the staircase. Instinctively, she blocked his path. You're not going upstairs. I want to speak to my daughter. You've said enough to her already. For a brief moment, the old volatility surfaced in his eyes. Move. No. The refusal altered the air between them. Khalid's composure fractured, revealing the anger beneath. You think he'll protect you? He demanded. You think that man can replace me? No one is replacing you. He already has. The accusation was less about Omar and more about Khalid's wounded pride. He could not tolerate the idea that she had found steadiness elsewhere. Leave, she said firmly. Instead, he grabbed her wrist, not violently, but with the intention of control. The gesture reignited years of contained fear. She pulled back, and in the movement, her elbow struck a glass bowl on the console table. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp against the storm outside. Upstairs, a door creaked. Go back to your room. Amina called, her voice breaking. Khalid tightened his grip. You're making this worse. You're frightening them. They need to understand consequences. Consequences for what? For speaking to someone kindly. For disrespect. The argument spiraled, fueled by old grievances and fresh resentment. Khalid released her wrist only to move toward the kitchen, pacing as he spoke about betrayal, reputation, humiliation. Each word felt rehearsed, as though he had been preparing this confrontation for days. You've destroyed this family, he said finally. You destroyed it when you stopped seeing us as people. Silence followed, thick, electric. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. For a fraction of a second, both of them stood still, suspended between pride and surrender. Then Khalid stepped closer again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. If I lose them because of you, I'll make sure you lose everything. The threat was no longer abstract. It was imminent. Amina's gaze drifted toward the kitchen counter where a knife lay beside the half-cut vegetables from dinner. The sight registered unconsciously, not as intention, but as awareness of proximity. You won't take them from me, she said, though her certainty wavered. I already have the evidence. He reached into his jacket pocket again, but whether for his phone or something else, she could not tell. The memory of his earlier grip, the echo of Hiba's tearful confession, and the relentless campaign to undermine her converged into a single, overwhelming surge of fear. Another crash of thunder, a sudden movement, a struggle too fast to narrate cleanly. When the motion stopped, the room felt unnaturally quiet. Khalid staggered backward, shock replacing fury. His hand pressed against his side. The knife clattered to the floor between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain continued its steady assault against the windows, indifferent to what had just occurred. Khalid's expression shifted, not to rage, but to disbelief, as though he had never considered that control could fracture. Amina stared at her trembling hands, unable to trace the exact second when defense became irreversible action. Upstairs, a muffled sob. Footsteps on the stairs. The storm outside did not slow, and in the silence that followed, one truth became unavoidable. Whatever had begun as suspicion had now crossed into consequence. Only God knows. The courtroom was colder than Amina Rahman expected. Not in temperature, but in temperament. The air felt measured, disciplined, stripped of emotion. Every glance carried assessment. Every whisper seemed sharpened by judgment. Amina sat beside her attorney, hands folded in her lap, aware that the world had reduced her to a single question: victim or murderer. Across the aisle, Khalid Hassan's family occupied the front bench. His mother clutched prayer beads with trembling fingers, her grief unmistakable. His older brother stared straight ahead, jaw set with restrained fury. To them, Amina was not complex. She was culpable. The prosecution rose first. They described Khalid as a father seeking reconciliation, a man concerned about his children's moral environment. They presented screenshots of Amina's messages with Omar Siddiqui, careful, respectful exchanges that nevertheless suggested emotional intimacy. They argued that humiliation had fueled resentment, and resentment had escalated into premeditation. She feared losing custody, the prosecutor concluded. She had motive, opportunity, and emotional attachment to another man. The confrontation that night was not spontaneous. It was inevitable. Amina listened without visible reaction. Each statement simplified years of tension into digestible accusations. Abuse without bruises rarely survives translation. Her attorney stood calmly when it was his turn. He did not romanticize her. He did not demonize Khalid. Instead, he spoke of documented custody disputes, of threatening messages, of repeated unannounced visits. He emphasized the broken glass found at the scene, the bruising on Amina's wrist, the children's recorded statements describing their father's anger. This was not revenge, he said steadily. It was fear. The word lingered. Omar Siddiqui was called to testify. He walked to the stand with restrained composure, his presence neither dramatic nor apologetic. When questioned, he admitted to caring for Amina. He admitted to frequent conversations. He denied any physical relationship. His voice did not waver when the prosecutor implied that emotional intimacy constituted betrayal. I supported her as a friend, he said simply, because she had no one else she could speak to. And you hoped that friendship would become more? The prosecutor pressed. Omar paused. Hope is not a crime. A faint murmur rippled through the room. Then came the testimony Amina had dreaded most. Hiba, small but resolute, entered the courtroom holding a court officer's hand. Yusuf remained outside, too young to endure formal questioning. Hiba's eyes searched for her mother briefly before focusing forward. Did your father ever argue with your mother? The defense asked gently. Yes, Hiba answered. Did he ever frighten you? A hesitation. Then sometimes. The prosecution approached carefully. Did you see what happened that night? Hiba swallowed. I heard loud voices. Something broke. Mama told us to stay upstairs. Did your mother seem angry? She seemed scared. The simplicity of her response carried more weight than elaborate argument. When Amina herself was called to testify, the courtroom shifted. She walked to the stand aware that her words would not only defend her freedom, but define her morality. Why didn't you call the police before the confrontation escalated? The prosecutor asked. Because I believed I could manage it, she replied. You believed you could manage an angry man who had threatened your custody rights? I believed I could calm him, she corrected. Instead, you armed yourself. I did not plan to, yet you picked up a knife. Her breath caught. I reacted. To what? To fear. The prosecutor stepped back, allowing silence to imply doubt. Her attorney approached last. Mrs. Rahman, in that moment, what were you thinking about? My children. Not about revenge. No. Not about humiliation. No. Only your children. She held his gaze. Only them. Closing arguments distilled the trial into opposing narratives. A jealous woman eliminating an obstacle, or a mother cornered by escalating intimidation. The jury withdrew. Hours stretched. Amina folded and unfolded her hands, whispering quiet prayers she had not rehearsed. When the jury returned, the courtroom rose as one. The verdict, not guilty on grounds of self-defense, landed like fragile glass. Relief did not explode. It settled slowly, cautiously. Khalid's mother wept openly. His brother shook his head in disbelief. Omar exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Amina did not celebrate. Freedom in the eyes of the law did not erase memory. Outside the courthouse, reporters called her name, demanding statements, seeking confession or defiance. She offered neither. She spoke only once. "I did what I believed would protect my children," she said quietly. "God knows the rest." That night, back in her house, repaired but not restored, she tucked Hiba and Yusuf into their beds. The storm had long passed, leaving the air clear and deceptively calm. Omar stood at the doorway before leaving, maintaining the respectful distance he had always kept. "It's over," he said softly. Amina looked at him, then at the hallway where her children slept. "Is it?" she asked. "Because acquittal does not silence conscience. Because survival does not answer every question. Because somewhere between fear and action lies a line that only the soul can measure." As the house settled into quiet, Amina stood alone in the kitchen where everything had changed. The counter had been replaced, the floor repaired. No visible trace remained. Yet memory does not require evidence. She closed her eyes and whispered a final prayer, not for vindication, but for truth. For whether the world believed her innocent or guilty, one certainty endured. Only God knew what truly happened in the space between threat and consequence. And some truths are heavier than any verdict.